So we're going to be continuing in our series today called The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of David. Today is kind of part 2 of the life of David. Today we're going to take a 30,000-foot view of the life of David. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." Progress doesn't always look like progress. Are there any impatient people in the room? I'm the only one? Wow. Growing up, do you remember measuring your height in the doorways of your house? You know, from your perspective at the time, you couldn't really see the growth that was taking place. But later on, when you look back and you see all the marks that were left as you grew up, you can clearly see the growth. I love those time-lapse videos where it shows in about a minute or less what took maybe an hour or a week or even a year to complete. It's so hard to be patient, especially when we're in a hurry. And we're not getting to our destination quite fast enough. It's so hard to remember that not all achievements are readily visible or measurable. Too often, from our vantage point, progress doesn't always look like progress. That's an important observation. Just because we think we're not getting anywhere doesn't mean that we aren't. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean nothing is happening. When we forget that, that's when we can get discouraged, disappointed, disparaged, distressed, disillusioned. I love seeing tangible, measurable results, celebratable results. Few things frustrate me more than when I'm giving my all and feeling as though I've done everything that I can possibly do, and it still feels like I'm just spinning my wheels and getting nowhere fast. Everyone wants to make progress, to advance, have the satisfaction of accomplishment, and nobody wants to feel the hopelessness of one step forward and 2 steps back. We're all addicted to instant results, to success. Worse, in our instant world of have it your way, there's a growing detachment between hard work and results. We have such an unrealistic expectation of minimal effort with incredible returns. When the truth is, progress takes more than effort. It takes time, which leads to our main point today. So often in life, progress doesn't always look like progress. Some strides and successes, they come easy to us. But for most of us, results are slow and they're hard to measure. Our story today speaks life into frustration, and as David finds himself in an impossible situation. Today we're going to time-lapse about 20 years into the span of a few minutes here this morning. And I hope that you can then see and appreciate some of the things that you might otherwise miss. So David found himself in a precarious situation. Last week we looked at David's life from the ground level. Today we're going to back up and look at it from a 30,000-foot view. So we're going to take a step back and look at the big picture. So from a 30,000-foot view, it looked like David really wasn't getting anywhere. If anything, it looked like David was in trouble, in danger of coming apart. You might say a lot of things to describe David's situations, but progress would likely not be a word that any of us would use. We start in 1 Samuel 16. For the first time David is anointed as king, the clock starts. Remember, David has had an awkward life. He's a teenager, he's a nobody, he's been excluded and forgotten by his own family, despised and just cast aside. And he's now the focal point. And the prophet privately reveals that David is going to be the next king. And this is kind of awkward because there's already a king, a jealous king, who wants to hold on to his position. David's life went from bad to worse. It was turned upside down. He kills Goliath and he catches the eye of the king. David gets asked to stay in the palace. So he's going places, or at least so it seems. Overnight, David goes from being a shepherd to being a hero, rubbing elbows with royalty. Let's look at some of David's accomplishments. He becomes the king's armor bearer. He marries the king's daughter. He becomes BFFs with Jonathan, the king's son. He becomes the personal musician and captain of the king's bodyguard. David becomes one of the king's most trusted subjects, who even ate at his table. David has special access, yet he wasn't getting the perks or breaks that some might hope for. In all of this tension is just building. The king knows someone else is going to get the throne. He was as suspicious as he was jealous. Eventually, King Saul figures out David is the future king. David had the promise, but he had yet to get the position. And from here on out, it's going to be a very uncomfortable wait. But progress doesn't always look like progress. He had to wait not a month, not a year, not even a decade. It would be 15 years before he would be publicly announced as the king of Judah. Now, notice I didn't say the king of Israel. We'll get there in a minute. Saul came up with this sinister plan. If David is dead, he can't take the throne, right? So he plans David's demise. Saul tries many different ways to kill, trap, or cause David to stumble or fall or die. He put him in battles that he thought he couldn't win. He married him off to his idol-worshiping daughter who worshiped foreign gods. He sent him on impossible missions that were full of danger. He tried to kill him with his own spear twice. David was starting to get the picture. David grew up in some dysfunction, but this is a toxic relationship, and it's time to go. David gets a warning from his best friend, the king's son. Hey, my dad is going to kill you. You need to run for your life. Process this with me here. So for the next 15 years, there would be no tangible evidence at all that David was even close to the position that he was first promised in 1 Samuel 16. Since the day he first heard of this, he has gone from bad to worse to running for his life. 15 years, David's running as a fugitive. And this same David once penned these words, Psalm 27:14, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." In total, David would wait another 7 years after becoming the king of Judah before he would become king of all Israel. Okay, so understand this. David had been promised, but had to wait over 20 years before he got the position. Not just wait, but live that part of his life on the run for his life. During that time, David had some close calls with King Saul. Saul and his army are hot on David's tail, and this presented some challenges for David. David has taken some oaths, and unlike Saul, oaths meant something to David. David had taken an oath to God. He had taken an oath to the king who was trying to kill him, and to the king's family. He is bound. He can't so much as defend himself, not even to save his own life from the king. In other words, David's in a fight that he can't win. But just like before, the battle is the Lord's. But this time, there's nothing for David to do but wait and run. Last week, I tried to give you a snapshot of how we got to this point in our story. We left off last week with Saul finding out that David went to Keilah. David and some of his men, they get boxed in this cave. Saul's army's in pursuit, but they've lost their trail. And well, the king, he needs a pit stop in the local rest area. So this is kind of an intense moment here. David and the men are trapped in this cave, and the king is entering the cave, or in this case, the restroom. This is where David's faith would have to grow rather than falter. Remember our opening passage, Proverbs 19:21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. A promise we would all do well to memorize and trust. The Lord's plans always prevail. Not man's, but God's. We have a name for this. It's called God's sovereignty. And it was this knowledge that gave David the courage and the peace in this place of waiting for fulfilled promises. Listen as he talks about the power of God's words. Psalm 33, 6-12. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea into jars. He puts the deep into storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. Now pay attention to this part. Verse 10. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever. the purposes of his heart through all generations. Blessed is a nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his inheritance. So even as the enemy, Saul, is running up on David's heels and now has him unknowingly cornered, David's in a unique position and temptation. David knows God has promised. God chose and pledged to save David by his power, by his provision, by his promise. David doesn't know how, he just knows that he will. All of that would be tested in this moment. As David and his men sit in the cave in 1 Samuel 24, they hear the voices of the king and his army. They don't know if they've been discovered, they don't know what's going on, but all of that quickly comes to a point when the king enters the cave. Unguarded, vulnerable, and blinded by his need to use the bathroom. He throws down his robe and he relieves himself, and unseen next to him is David. 1 Samuel 24. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, 'I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish.'" David's in a spot here. The man trying to kill him is feet away. And David can end this cat and mouse game once and for all right now. What would you do? You've taken an oath to God and to man. This would be high treason. But who would blame you? And if you do nothing, you may never get this chance again. Maybe this is what God had planned all along. This is how you get to be king. This was a test of all tests. David was inches away from committing the same sin that took the throne from Saul. This is kind of where you got to step back and time out, and ask yourself, what's happening here? And what am I supposed to do? This is a good place to introduce something that we know David knew about, the sovereignty of God. Meaning everything God plans, promises, purposes will come to pass. The Lord's plans always prevail, no exceptions. Isaiah 43:12. "You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, that I am God. Yes, and from ancient days I am He. No one can deliver out of my hand. When I act, who can reverse it?" Isaiah 55:11. "So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." David not only knew this, he wrote about it and sang songs about it. Psalm 37:7. "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." God's sovereignty is one of those things that's just a total game changer. Once you understand it, you understand what an incredible shield and protector God is. It means no person, not even a king, can keep or take from you what God has promised. Many may try, and they may temporarily take what is yours, but eventually it will be yours. They may resist and threaten and fight, but they will unequivocally fail because they are not fighting against you. They are fighting against the God who never loses. So far, Saul has given it his best. He tried to skewer him and spear David to a wall twice in 1 Samuel 18:10 and then 19:10. He tried to kill him in battles in 1 Samuel 18:17. He tried to snare him with his idol-worshiping daughter, Michal, 1 Samuel 18:21. Now, I kind of threw that in there last week. I don't know if you caught it or not, but about the household idol being put in the bed with the goat hair put on it to make it look like David was still in the bed. That idol should have never been in their house in the first place. And now Saul tries to label him a traitor who must be put to death for treason. 1 Samuel 22:13, when he's speaking to the priest Ahimelech about David, who he would then go on to kill along with 70 other priests. Through all of this, David has prevailed, not because David was so clever, but because God is sovereign. Psalms 37:39 through 40. "The salvation of the righteous comes from the Lord. He is their stronghold in times of trouble. The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him. What if we could understand, know and believe and trust as David did? To know not even the devil himself, with all of the power of hell behind him, can take a single thing from us that God has promised. Don't you want that kind of rest and confidence? To be able to just obey and trust God without fear of the future? Can you imagine not worrying about what happens after you obey God? Your only concern is that you're faithful to him. What others do or do not do with your obedience is of no concern. It doesn't matter. Do what God tells you and leave the results to him. Psalm 37, 32 through 36. The wicked lie in wait for the righteous, seeking their very lives, but the Lord will not leave them in their power, or let them be condemned when brought to trial. Wait for the Lord and keep his way. Wait for the Lord and keep his way. He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. I have seen a wicked and ruthless man flourishing like a green tree in its native soil, but he soon passed away and was no more. Though I looked for him, he could not be found. The sovereignty of God means we don't have to worry or fret when evil opposes us, because what God is doing is set. It can't be altered or successfully opposed. When it comes to the sovereignty of God, the question wasn't the what, it was the who. And I know that's kind of hard for us to wrap our minds around. God had already established the what. What was still uncertain was the who. Who would God cast or choose to do it through? Buried deep in David's story, we see this teased out. Saul sabotaged himself. God wanted to cast him, but he disqualified himself. Saul's inability to wait on God, that's the only reason David was getting the throne. Because Saul failed to wait for God when it mattered the most. All the way back to where we started, 1 Samuel 13 through 14. You acted foolishly, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people because you have not kept the Lord's commands. His foolish act led to the casting of David. And if David didn't watch his P's and Q's here, God could choose another again. David he's sitting on a razor's edge with the ultimate question about to be put to the ultimate test. Am I going to force my hand, my wishes and my will, or am I going to wait for God? It's hard to appreciate David's dilemma. Saul has something that David wants. It's within reach. But to take it, he's going to have to do some pretty shady and questionable things. Things that you would have a hard time explaining to anyone. The conflict, you know that there are those times when deep down, you know, this isn't the time. This is not God's way. Everything that you know about God tells you that this isn't right. But you can make it happen. Bend or break a few rules, and this too can be yours. And to complicate matters, you don't have much time to think about it. No time for a prayer service or getting some good godly counsel. This is the lucky break of a lifetime, and you only have seconds before it expires. Back and forth, your mind and your heart go as you circle the options. What do you do? It's funny, you know, I mean, it all sounds so foreign to us when we read this in 1 Samuel. But we've all been there, or at least most of us have. Will you do what is right and pass on the temptation, or will you seize the moment and beg for forgiveness later? Worse, your friends are telling you, carpe diem, right? Go get it. Are you out of your mind? This is your moment. What would you do? What do you do? Let me tell you what David did. David said no. David waited for God to fulfill his promise at a time of his choosing, rather than make it happen at a time of David's choosing. He didn't listen to his heart. He didn't listen to his own logic. He didn't listen to his friends, and he didn't buckle under the pressure. David stood down, and he had his men do the same. And he waited. He almost waited. David ended up crossing a line that instantly pricked his conscience. Chapter 24, verse 4. Then David crept up, unnoticed, and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now, it might not bother you, but David couldn't take it. He didn't do what most others would have done, and then he did what most others would not do. Even as Saul is leaving the cave, David is overcome with guilt for taking a little snip off of his robe. And here's David's big gutsy reveal. The sole reason that Saul and his army are there is to hunt David down and kill him. And David just walks out of the cave and he says, "Here I am." 1 Samuel 24, 8 through 21. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift a hand against my master because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion." So through all of this, David is still trying to make things right with Saul. "I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. So my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand." When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." Don't you want to be that bold, that certain of God and his promises, that you could confront those who not only want to do you harm, but may even want you dead? I'm pretty confident in God, but man, I don't know if I could do that. Listen, as we wrap this up this morning, as we see the choice we all have before us, I want you to remember this passage. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." David didn't just write this, he lived it. Progress doesn't always look like progress. But anything God has promised you is yours if you will just wait and trust him. I can't stress this enough. It is imperative that we keep the faith and don't lose our will to wait for the Lord. Don't fret when evil men oppose you or threaten you or seek to keep you from obeying God. Don't sabotage yourself by getting ahead of God and his story about your life. Wait for the Lord. There was and still remains a high price for not waiting on God. The only person that can sabotage God's plans and promises for you is you. Saul and David both chose, and so must we. Makes me wonder, how many things have I missed out on in my life because I didn't wait on God's will? Church, in the end, all we have to do is stand up for what's right. Don't give up. Don't give in or give out. Stand up and stand tall. Let us all be faithful as we wait to see the rewards that God has promised, because we know what is coming is worth the wait and so very worth our while. So wait for the Lord. Isaiah 64, 4-5. God acts on behalf of those who wait for him. He comes to the help of those who gladly do what's right, who remember his ways.